Hello, I'm Dr. Scott Masson here with you to discuss the Rings of Power, episode 6, looking at Udun is the title of this work. And I have to say, I was most impressed with this episode, at least compared to the previous episodes that we've seen thus far. It has a short word to describe the episode, and it also has a single plot line. It does not jump here, there, and everywhere. Stays with a topic, and the episode benefits from this enormously. Udun is a place, you can see it on Tolkien's map in The Lord of the Rings, to the northwest of Mordor. It's a deep valley, but it's inside the Black Gate, where the Black Gate would have been held, if you recall that in your mind's eye. From the film, that is where it is. I did a little searching, and I found out that this is also the first name that was given for Morgoth's very first fortress, which was called the Tumno. It is going to be a very important place, and I think this is obviously also an important episode where plot lines come together. We have the orcs and the southerners, and they're going to encounter Isildur, Galadriel, and the Númenóreans. They're all going to come together in this episode rather quickly, and much thankfulness on my part for it. By the way, Udun also, and I think this is important, in Sindarin, that is the elven tongue of Sindarin, means dark pit or underworld or hell. So something like Gehenna in the New Testament, the burning garbage dump outside the city of Israel, or outside the city of Jerusalem, rather, which is compared to hell. And lots of those sorts of nuances in the plot here. And again, some richness for that. I still have some concerns about the characters and so forth, but as I say, as a spectacle, this episode works. One of the things that works for me, I think, is are two scenes. One by Adar, who was the head of the orc army, looked somewhat like an elf, and we find him burying alpharin seeds. Interestingly, he's hiding behind a tree when he does this from his own orc army, which is apparently an elven tradition. And these seeds are what elves do before they go to battle. We find this out later on, because this is what we also see Arondir does. Arondir with Bronwyn in the southern army, he gives her some alpharin seeds, 2 of them, and says that this is a tradition that they use before they go to battle. And the motto that goes with it is new life in defiance of death. So a seed will come up, life will triumph over death, etc. It's very interesting, given that Adar is committed to this same mantra, and really this allegiance to life over death. I find that rather interesting. Sorry about that, some technical difficulties there. So this bearing of the seeds and the mantra, new life in defiance of death, and the mention of the alpharin seeds. These alpharin seeds, you might recall, were the alpharin, again, do a little searching, is another word for those white similmune flowers that were growing on the graves outside of Edoras, where kings were buried. So lots of rich allusions here across Tolkien's legendarium here, and some nice touches here. But again, both parties here on what we would regard as the good and the bad side, nonetheless making a sort of similar allegiance. And so we have something here of complexity in the plot, because those who are evil nonetheless seem to have some allegiance to the good. And likewise, those who seem to be good namely Galadriel and and her human sidekick, seem to be rather evil in their attempt to deal with their enemies. And we'll see that a little bit later on as I discuss Galadriel in encountering um, uh, Adar and what she's threatening to do with him, which seems rather dark, to put it mildly. But at any rate, the orcs launch off on their mission, which is to destroy the Southlanders, and they chant Nampat, which means death in the black tongue of Mordor. So we know what they are devoted to, but is their commander, does he have the same motivation here, this same allegiance to utter destruction and annihilation? That comes into question here at any rate. The scene cuts to Isildur and Galadriel on the decks of the 3 Númenórean ships en route to this location. And Isildur, we find, is on the deck hoping to catch sight of land for the first time. And we find that he wants to leave Númenor. I mean, thus far he's been rather unimpressive as Isildur. But here he reveals that he has wanted to get away from the place Númenor has become. And he asks Galadriel whether it ever existed. She's surprised to see him, and yet seems to see something in him that rather belies her usual girl boss, revenge heroine status, which is a little bit of insight into others and compassion for others. She asks him who he is, and he just says that he is a stable boy. And she seems moved by that fact, that a stable boy is nonetheless looking to battle ahead. And she comments, as I say, in response to the question, did Númenor ever exist? She says, yes, it did, and it still does, in the heart of the lowliest. Rather interesting phrase here, and suggests that Númenor is something like Camelot. It is a legend of the past, and yet when it is the ideals of that kingdom are lived out, then it becomes present. And it's present then in the midst of humility, which is rather the contradiction of Galadriel herself thus far. So again, some sense deep within Galadriel that everything that she seems to represent in her person is a frost that covering over something more rich lying underneath, an awareness of humility, a sense of servanthood, etc., which so much marks the Lord of the Rings trilogy in all of the characters, a sense of duty and also an awareness of the danger of vengeance. But we cut back to the scene in the Southlands, and we find that Arondir, remember the wood elf, is trying to destroy the shard of the sword hilt that he had discovered in the last episode from Theo, and he simply can't destroy it. No matter how he tries, he can't destroy this thing, and so he tries to hide it, and hide it he does. But of course, it's not going to remain hidden for long. The orcs arrive, and Arondir does some wood elvish things, rather like our elven heroes of the Lord of the Rings series, and rather splendid, I have to say. But in the end, they outfoxed him, and most of those orcs that they'd sent in were actually men in disguise. And the second round brings Adar and the rest of them, and they end up with their human captives and insist that the sword hilt be handed over or else. And they refuse to give him this, at which point they set about killing them one by one, passing swords through their bellies, watching the blood come out. It's rather gory. It is also rather unlike Tolkien, I must say. It's moving into the sort of lurid uh, uh, filmmaking that really is not in keeping with Tolkien. I would have said. But there is a rather touching scene, and this is again hinting at something in awareness of plot development towards more of a Tolkien-esque understanding of good and evil. To her son, Bronwyn says, as a note of consolation, as doom seems to be closing in on them, that in the end, this shadow is but a small and passing thing. There is light and high beauty forever beyond its reach. And she says to him, find the light and the shadow will not find you. Now, this is a direct quote from Tolkien when Samwise is at his point of uttermost despair and darkness in Mount Doom. He approaching to Mount Doom, he has the same words of consolation. So these are poetic words in the midst of this episode, rather unlike the language of the rest of it, and that's because they've taken it directly from Tolkien. More of that ought to happen. But these are good, sense that light is greater than the darkness, and the darkness has not comprehended it, nor can it ever grasp it. And so we have a sense of light, even as the darkness closes in on these figures, and the shard of the sword hilt is about to be taken. A sense that light is nonetheless overseeing this whole episode. And so there's a reference to the Valar that watches over growing things, and that is mentioned as a hand is placed upon a tree, and as again these Alfrin seeds are grasped and planted, that life and light will nonetheless prevail. So these are encouraging signs. And the Númenóreans arrive exactly at the point when the sun is rising, very much like the two Peter Jackson movies, where the riders come in at the last moment. But unfortunately here it isn't. It is too late, and Theo, to save his mother, tells Adar where the sword hilt is. And then only seconds later we hear the sound of the thunder of the hooves of the horses shaking the water, and if only they had waited a bit longer, but they don't. And Adar, with triumph, takes the sword hilt, gives it to Waldraig, the man who has the sort of Sauron's tattoo on his arm, and tells him he has a task for him. We break away from him, and we see the orcs trying to face off against the Númenóreans, who are coming in thundering on their horses in a splendid scene. Again, Galadriel going forward, more like Elizabeth in the second installment, with this Joan of Arc sort of sequence, but in this case bent on vengeance, ahead of the rest of the cavalry. And she does, as I say, girl boss types of things. So she's spinning off the horse, and arrows are missing her because she's basically almost underneath the horse, and then swinging her sword upwards. Okay, well, I mean, this is Legolas type stuff, so that's all fine. But we find that, so she asks this orc or this elf Arondir where the orc commander is. He's never set eyes on her, I don't think, but perhaps she has. Perhaps he has. And he points out Adar, at which point she gallops after him, and he is asked who that woman was, and she says it is Galadriel, the commander of the armies of the north. And there's sort of awe in his voice and awe in the eyes of those beholder. And of course, again, it's a little bit like contemporary films, very much awed by things that they see. There's a lot of rather superficial appearances rather like this throughout the film. Again, when the king of the Southlanders is revealed, he is revealed for having a little pouch on his on his belt, and that seems to be enough for everyone to hail him as king and fall down before him prostration. Any rate, the chase is on. Galadriel storming after him. She even utters the little touch of Norolim into the horse's ear, much like Arwen had done in the Fellowship of the Ring. And she eventually does, along with her human companion, capture and Adar. I keep forgetting his name, and insists that he tell her where the sword hilt is. He refuses to do this, at which point her darkness really becomes revealed, and she says, first of all, she wants to kill him, is prevented from doing so by her friend, and then she vows to kill him. However, it won't come immediately. It will be after every last orc is killed, and only at that point, after he's known that all of them are dead, will she then also kill him. Now, this is extraordinarily dark. There's nothing redeemable about this character at this point whatsoever. She's an intensely dislikable figure. It's hard to distinguish good from evil. In fact, at this point, as I say, Adar claims that he is created by Eru, in contradiction to what Galadriel says about his origins, that she's a tortured form of elf that has been, and therefore that he's one of the sons of the dark. He says, no, we're the sons of Eru. Is he a liar? Is she uncharitable in her take on it? She's certainly uncharitable. Whether he is truthful in his origins, who knows? But again, something rather unsavory about the portrait of good and evil here, and the character of Galadriel, who seems, as I say, more of a Byronic hero, as I said at the very outset of my study in these Rings of Power series. And he responds to her, by the way, Adar, and this is really interesting. He says, perhaps you search for Morgoth's successor should have ended in your own mirror. And I think he speaks on behalf of the viewer here at this point. And there's no doubt that we are to see her that way. And so what I expect will happen is some sort of transformation of character down the road, something that will change her heart and transform her into the character that we know in The Lord of the Rings. But thus far, she is nothing like that. And as I say, seems to represent evil herself more than anything else. The scene concludes, the episode concludes with Waldrake succeeding in his task. He has been given the sword hilt. He takes it to the village where this sculpture of Sauron had been placed, and sticks it in the ground and twists it. And at that point, we find the reason why these tunnels had been dug by the orcs. It's because it was in preparation for this moment, because when he sticks this sword hilt in the ground, it unleashes basically all of the water pours out from a pool above and breaks down through the tunnels in the ground now, and goes down into the earth, into the fire there, and we have an explosion on Mount Doom, which fills the whole landscape with shadow and ash and lava and smoke. And the scene cuts with this billowing towards Galadriel, who stands stone-faced towards that with her back to us. And as I say, the scene goes to black at that point, and we're waiting for what will happen in the final episode, in the next episode. But at this stage, it looks like she is going to perish in the scene of this destructive onslaught. We're quite certain that that is not so, but that's how it looks at that point. So, as I say, this is in terms of action and in terms of plot sophistication and depth and unity, this is the best episode by far. It pulls together many of the plot strands. We did not get any mention of the the hobbits or the dwarves here, and no doubt we'll cut to them next scene, and we'll have to endure the Harfoots a little bit longer, and hopefully we'll find that Gandalf has now progressed so that he is something more than a toddler in speech. But till then, I am Dr. Scott Masson. If you like this, please do subscribe to my channel, and I shall see you next time.